We've met a few times. Ariel does it. It's a very old friend. Because I still feel so comfortable in his company.
All right, almost showtime.
Inside space.
No, because I know.
They're brothers, right?
No, he got his back.
And guess what? After something good, you said tomorrow?
I said like
I saw that and I didn't say anything because I was like, or what?
buy the tickets for it. Oh, what did I do? Oh my god. You're gonna see his harsh behavior. Mike's right there, man.
I know.
So since we're not here, we're going to take this tonight.
No grid, no audio level.
Good evening, good evening, good evening, good day one after, what, daylight savings time? Such a weird notion of time, we can save it. Welcome to a 72-year-old, at least, San Francisco State Poetry Center. I'm really excited that we have Steve Dickinson, the 25-year curator of the Poetry Center, the person who held it down for a long time. We also have Bob Gluck, who in another moment held down this space. It is the home of a remarkable archive that's particularly singular in the sort of annals of American poetry. So for more than 70 years, you're talking about audio and video recordings of poets kind of coming through, doing readings, giving readings, all those things. Now, I usually don't ask for money, but I do want to say we could stand some money to preserve that archive, but it's the last time tonight. I'm incredibly excited that you joined me this evening for a reading and conversation with Charles. Do you have a middle name, Charles?
I do.
What is it?
Kegel, K-E-G-E-L. It was my mother's maiden name, my grandfather's name.
So
Like-
Charles Kegel Bernstein. And the weird thing is the middle name is oddly important to me because the people I consider friends, I actually record their middle names. And that becomes a way, it's kind of like the times when your mom calls you by your full name, that I kind of have a full name in my back pocket. So, just in case, right?
That's actually, now I'm not quite as, well, as old as the Poetry Center there, but I don't recall anybody asking me that question.
So I am capable of surprising you.
It's also good because in that traditional sense, it is my mother's name, so it's a very traditional kind of name.
And I think it's important to kind of have those names in the room too. So I'm delighted to be welcoming Charles Kegel Bernstein, who is, maybe I'll retell this story. We were reading at St. Mark's Poetry Center or something in New Orleans at the MLA conference. I am from New Orleans. I become more New Orleanian or New Orleanian with each passing day, actually. And we were there, and there were all these folk from New York and fields afar who came to do a reading at the St. Mark's Church. And so somehow, I think Leanne Brown had said, Tonya, come read. I'm like, wow, okay. And my mother drove me to the reading. Now my mother, Barbara Ann, who actually doesn't know of this right now, so at some point she's going to look it up and say, why do you have to say my name? She drove me to the reading, and we went and we sat in the pews of this church we've never been to. And we're sitting there, and there's poet after poet after poet reading. And at that time, I was very kind of, not that I'm not shy, maybe it's that I'm antisocial, but I've been couching it as being shy. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm like, okay, they call me up, I read my little poem, and then but I can't quite look at the audience, and then I go sit down. And so I'm sitting in the pews, and my mom's next to me. And so there are certain points she's leaning over, she's like, why is this person reading like this? And so at the end of the reading, Charles is sitting next to Bob Pearl. And he stands up and turns around and says, hi, my name is Charles Bernstein. I didn't know who you were before this. I will never forget you. My mother says, your work I liked. And it was this kind of brilliant, incisive moment, because for a long time I tried to figure out, what was she critiquing? Like, what was she registering about what was going on there? And, you know, maybe at some point, if I have a cocktail ever again, I will talk to you about what I think she was registering. But it was a pronouncement that it matters to me to say that Charles meant. And so, so he's here. He gave a talk at Stanford, but that friendship, that sort of offer of friendship and what it means to not be forgotten, has been steady, and kind of remarkable. And I tell this story because Charles Bernstein is a distinguished retired professor of poetry and poetries. He's published collections of essays, libretta, numerous books of poetry, and edited multiple collections. And you can look up the titles. I won't list that. He's won fellowships from Guggenheim, the New York Foundation for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Roy Harvey Pierce Archive for New Poetry Prize at University of California, San Diego, the Bowlingen, and tons of stuff. More important to me is that he's a mensch, that he's funny, and that we have real, not always easy conversations, and real questions about how we live in the world as it is. So I'd like to welcome Charles. He will give a reading, and then we'll have a conversation, and then open it to questions from the good, bad, and good and bad people in the audience.
It's great to be here with Tonya, and I certainly remember reading in New Orleans. It was an MLA offsite reading, and she sometimes tells that story as if I was a nice person, which I may be. But the reason that I said that to Tonya is that it was apparent to me that she was a great poet, no question, and she was. So it wasn't just, to be friendly. To be friendly, I'd say hello. I say that because because it's the case. I mean, and I think if you ever hear Tonya, it's just a remarkable experience. And I do write something about the work that she was reading, that early work that's in my new book, The Kinds of Poetry I Want. There's an essay about this work. So, and it's great to be here and to see so many people I know, for a long time. And I read here first at the San Francisco State University Poetry Center in 1979. And I was just shown a few minutes ago the videotape. And it said Ted Berrigan and me, and I said, no, of course, I didn't read with Ted Berrigan. It's just for some reason on the same video reel. He must have read around the same time. So I was 29 at that time. It was very a great experience because I wasn't normally allowed to read at a place like that, and a place like this. I was standing up there, and in the room came, Robert Duncan and Michael Palmer. Michael Palmer who's here all these days later, sitting on the aisle. One of them was sitting on the aisle. And next, I still kind of remember that scene. And at the end of the reading, Duncan gave me a poem he wrote during the reading, which was very, in a way, incredible generosity. And then, I became friends with Robert, but much more so with Michael and Kathy, who I either stayed at then or after that. So, it's great to go back. And I know a lot of other people here from that time too, but because San Francisco State is such a specific memory. So I'm going to read a little bit from this book called The Kinds of Poetry I Want, Essays and Comedies. And that's my most recent essay book. And it has some poems in it. And this one is called Leap for Lee Zemin. Poetry is more than meets the eye. It's more than meets the ear, too. It's total mind expansion through verbal, vocal, and visual extravagances. Poetry is not just an expansion of the mind, but a perception and heart. But it can't be understood by trying to figure it out. You need to take a leap of faith into the poem. Jump into it as if you were jumping into a hole in a frozen lake, fearing perhaps that you will drown or freeze. But once in the water, it's as warm as a hot spring, even if you can't swim. All of a sudden, you'll be floating on the poem's surface, then plunging deep. It just takes a leap of poetic faith. Many of the works in this are sequences of multiple poems, and this is or multiple works. This is the second one. Poetry Month will come a little late this year. Poetry's freedom, which is to say poetry's essential contribution to American culture, is grounded in its aversion to conformity and its resistance to the restrictions of market-driven popularity. Indeed, contemporary American poetry thrives through its small scale and radical differences of form. There is no one sort of American poetry, and certainly no right sort. This is what makes aesthetic invention so necessary. Free verse is not a type of non-metrical poetry, but an imperative to liberate verse from the constraints of obligatory convention and regulation. In that sense, free verse is an aspiration, and its stuttering breathlessness is a mark of its impossibility. I want not just a politics of identity, but an aesthetics of identity. While some may choose the straight path of self-righteousness, do not give up hope that they will return to the crooked roads that have no certainties. The goal is to find wilderness in bewilderment. Or is that a process? I'm the shell of the person I once was, the shell of a shell. But then the person I once was is a shell of the person I am now. The more realistic a poet is, the more distant from reality. Sutsuka here. I cannot make it decohere. The world doesn't make sense, we do. Sense is of the word and in the world. The non-human is also beyond the human. Assisted living? As opposed to what? I think all the other ones are funny too. Poetry is reacquired taste. Nearly touching are the ethical realm of our obligation to others and the aesthetic world of our freedom from such obligation. Those ardent in their beliefs and certain of God's will are the faithless ones. The thing is, life is a one-way street. Gods need us more than we need them, because without us, they would not exist. But without them, we do. I am for a single prayer initiative. God loves those who think for themselves. Physical distance, social intimacy, a kind of poetry. How the music learned to write. The poem that is true for all people at all times is true for no one and no time. I never met a person who cried fire when confronted by a snowball, but there are many today who cry freedom when confronted with tyranny. My agreement may be absolute to me, but it does not make it greater than yours. My freedom is not only that to the extent, my freedom is only that to the extent that it guarantees yours. Anything different, to the extent of the difference, is not liberty, it's oppression. Like a memorial. Now this is a good one for this group. Like a memorial, except we're all alive. Or we imagine we're alive, even though we died weeks ago. The fight for truthfulness is a fight against the claim of a single truth. At best, science and poetry both move toward truth through an insistence on truthfulness. Religion and politics, sometimes. Demagoguery, never. The temporary loss of our physical commons is devastating. But the commons needed now is imaginary, not territorial. This is another quote after Abraham Sutzkever. Those who know God's truth won't say. Those who say don't know. Injury to the imaginary is trauma. The imaginary commons is art. No hiding place. I thought language poetry was against emotion in the name of sensation. I thought language poetry was against theory in favor of praxis. I thought language poetry was lots of words making the most of meaning. I thought language poetry was the die-hard foe of the massed mediocrity. I thought language poetry was a big tent without roof or floor. I thought language poetry was sympathy without tea. I thought language poetry was sound in serial motion. I thought language poetry has branches in Paris, New York, Toronto, and Palm Springs. I thought language poetry was Marxist. I thought language poetry was anarchist. I thought language poetry was anti-Christ, was bourgeois aestheticism, I thought language poetry hated the voice. I thought language poetry was all voicing and never content. I thought language poetry was against realism. I thought language poetry was a new form of realism. I thought language poetry was against dogma. I thought language poetry refused its commissars. I thought language poetry was against closed groups. I thought language poetry was all thought in pursuit of potential action. I thought language poetry was Gertrude Stein all over again. I thought language poetry was trying to make the reader feel smart. I thought language poetry was a way of I thought language poetry was wary of proclamations of sincere expression. I thought language poetry was a lot of nonsense packaged to look important. I thought language poetry was the possibility of freedom. I thought language poetry was the major precursor to word salad email spam. I thought language poetry was short for L equals. I thought language poetry favored style over manner. I thought language poetry was too intellectual. I thought language poetry was too difficult to ignore. I thought language poetry was the cat's scratch. I thought language poetry was neither a school nor a movement, but a transient moment. I thought language poetry was a chimerical constellation. I thought language poetry was tendencies and investments, not rules or orders. I thought language poetry was minor literature with a vengeance. I thought language poetry was a collective figment of a collective imagination. I thought language poetry was an illusion. I thought language poetry was over. I thought language poetry resists the authority of language poetry. Language's acknowledgement. This has an epigraph from Langston Hughes. The land that has never been yet. I live in Brooklyn, New York, also called Kings County, though we have no king of Brooklyn, and go out of our way not to speak the King's English. 500 years ago, these lands were inhabited by people whose ancestors spoke Lenape-Munsee, among many other languages in the region. Most of those languages are now endangered or lost because of the genocide by mostly English and Dutch-speaking Christian immigrants who were unable to share this place with those who did not worship their God. I am a sojourner in this borough with people whose ancestors were abducted in Africa, brought here with catastrophic cruelty, and enslaved. These ancestors spoke Yoruba, Igbo, Hosi, and Bantu languages, among many others. Many of my neighbors came here, or their parents or grandparents came here from every part of the globe to find sanctuary from economic, ethnic, racial, and religious persecution, from famine, death, genocide, and dispossession. Some came simply to seek a better life. Their ancestors spoke hundreds of different languages, from Chinese to Celtic, Italian to Bengali, Yiddish and Polish, Russian to Spanish, Vietnamese, Arabic, Armenian, Creole, Portuguese, and Tagalog, to name only a small fraction. Some of these languages percolate through the accents you hear in the streets of Brooklyn. But others are almost stilled. Still, when you closely listen, you can hear them too, in the burning spaces between the words and the spaces between the spaces. Those spaces are our native tongue. English is a second language, even for those for whom it is an only language. I is they is us. English does not occupy us. We occupy English. This is the end of a long set of things called Summa Contra Gentiles. This is the last poem, and it's a translation of a Heine poem. And it first came to my attention as the haunting part of Louis Zukowski's poem beginning "the," which is just the first two lines. But I was always interested in that section. I went back, and the poem is really quite different. So the lines in Zukowski, which starts with "No mass will anyone sing, no Kaddish will anyone say, neither said nor sung, by none when I'm done." So that is about falling out of the Jewish community and not having enough people to say the prayer of the dead for you. And so that is a very important poem that Zukowski wrote. But I went back, and the poem is actually quite funny and different, but it's still called Memorial. No mass will anyone sing, no Kaddish will anyone say, neither said nor sung, by none when I'm done. But maybe one day, when the weather's bright and gay, out for a stroll in Montmartre, my Paulina alongside Mademoiselle Christina, with garlands of evergreens comes she to adorn my grave, and sigh, "Oh, my poor Guy," wet melancholy in her eye. Alas, dwell I way too high, that even for my sweet, a stool I can't supply. Geez, her weary, wobbling feet. Sweetie, fatty, don't go back to your house by foot. At the curb, grab a cab. Great hero, Heinrich Heine. So, I read some poems now from Topsy-Turvy. These are my most recent two books. And so this first one I'm going to read is also a translation of a Rukert poem, which is best known because of its setting in Mahler. It's a little bit different than the other translations you might see, and I call it I Song, the letter I Song. Comes I to this world abandoned, having wasted the time I was handed, till all that's left is the bandage. No matter, unnoticed, time passes, slowly, as dreams become lashes, still alone, caught in rhyme's ashes. Dead to this world's wrong dwells still I in my song, in every thorn, at every morn. And this one, written right on the day that John Ashbery died, just almost 10 years ago. If Sappho were a UFO and I were a genie, we dance on the surface of Pluto and dance at Ipanema Beach in Rio. Nothing much else glues me to this shredded fabric of the marvelous. On sale all these years, with no buyers and just 3 authorized sellers. I made it almost to Mars, then went home. Too much mud in those parts, and I missed the smell of home ground, even when it turned out to be imported. This one is called errata. For red, read, I shouldn't have done it. Should have left it alone. I don't know what came over me or why I could not try as I might overcome it. For oceanic, read, leeward, as when the ball dribbles its way to the center of the earth and the heart barely hears its own beat but never fails to heed yours. For lard, read, a studied casualist that disguises genuine casualness. For incandescent, read, drowned in love's apposite fortunes, leering at gushes in the gust of a fragrance. For thimbled, read, record-breaking heat reducing statues to mud puddles and ideas to pruning hooks. For cyclic, read, swollen. For brush briskly for 5 minutes with a capon minder. Brush briskly for 5 minutes with a capon minder, read, off limits. For crustacean, read, crustacean. For you be my gracious refuge now song, read, why do you rouse my soul and stir up the past? Be merciful, desist, let the embers of my joy be. For demonic dispossession, read, season of mist and mellow fruitfulness. All right, so this one is for Cecil Taylor. It's a tribute album that John Zorn did. He asked me to write the liner notes, which is in a perfect circle in that. I put it into prose. Poet Supreme. I've spasmodic. You've got locution as sent for Ori or release LLation reverberation recombination overlay propulse dash putting it puddle-minded breath turn as woe we cookers wait in good womency as celestial harmonics you can be hear the vibrations lashing inst dormers ich habe eine spontan Rhythmus, die Host kusun aus Sensormodus oder Frage Action überlebt Atman drechan sich wie walking into dormeren Horenkot including but not limited to dream screen whiplash wish list withered wisps succession over towed darn dare upster fluorescent emanations showered by blue be gathered like a gazelle doink bat on a hornfold enclunda manalo limitado so grita Venezuela water pequisado por blue ben vino talvez fiore de borca what a fluke if experimental creationist muse begins here. Mind forged in surreptitious eruption, scum, propitious, mired, smeared in tenebrae, stick, lactility, vicious, mired, nigh onto stem, sting, pouring, purring out of man whole. Qu'est-ce que c'est qu'un fluke? Je ne sais que chanter. Comment ceci dans éruptions merveilleuses, emborrées, et dans le ténébreux. Tactilité acoustique, inclination, près de la vapeur qui sort de la bouche des gouttes, inclus, mais pas limité à calque, cost of interpersonic questions. The making is the receiving, royal with and against all weight realize aus in re veil ing. The key thing there is that each of the non-alphabetic letters has to be precisely pronounced at exactly the same age performance. Well, here's a short one that somebody mentioned to me. It's called A Unified Theory of Poetry. I don't think so. But I could be wrong. I gotta move through. This is the darkness he called night. Virtue's a kind of despair, masquerading as care. A bitter current is for virtue sweet. Sublime wine sours its mouth. Snakes eat from its hands. Jackasses obey its whim. Self-nomination papers its path. Method is its M.O., holding tight to a higher love and fervently displayed empathies. Virtue's sword is truth, in love with itself, at odds with others. Celebrating standards it fashions, virtue jams miscreants, shams malcontents, shaming those abjure improvement. The passion of virtue is reprimand. Nothing is more beautiful to virtue than compelling justice and shattering dissent. Slashes in a pan that will never absolve aesthetics. The wreck of hope. Death is the end of all sadness. Storm follows each moment of bliss. Here lies the road to true madness, deeper than locks in abyss. Storm echoes surfeit of gladness. Loneliness lives by its wits. song sparrow. So this is very interesting. You know, there are mnemonics that copy the sound of what are they? Birds. And this one, the song sparrow, remarkable. And it's hard to believe, but it sounds exactly like a song sparrow. And I've read this, you know, in the open fields, and the song sparrows sing back to me because they hear it exactly like the song sparrow's song. And here it is. Maids, 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 put on your tea kettle, kettle, kettle. No time to waste. Get out your bass. Fiddle, fiddle, fiddle. Young lads, make haste. Dance to your love's riddle, riddle, riddle. Uncanny. So I'm going to read this very short poem, then I'm going to one final thing. This is the last poem in the book. It's called Duplexity. If anything I have done cancels what I feel, then put me on a boat without a keel, and I will row my way back to you, whatever else I do. Whatever else I do. And the last poem I'm going to read was a poem from a little bit earlier called All the Whiskey in Heaven. Not for all the whiskey in heaven, not for all the flies in Vermont, not for all the tears in the basement, not for a million trips to Mars, not if you paid me in diamonds, not if you paid me in pearls, not if you gave me your pinky ring, not if you gave me your curls, not for all the fire in hell, not for all the blue in the sky, not for an empire of my own, not even for peace of mind. No, never. I'll never stop loving you, not till my heart beats its last. And even then, in my words and my songs, I will love you all over again.
It's such a beautiful love poem, and it's weird the songs I'm going to play after this love poem, but
Or not so, in a way, but yes, we'll see.
maybe
Yeah,
not.
yeah.
And I was thinking about the story you told about it being read by the famous chef to her
Right,
husband.
Rachel
and
Ray.
What?
Rachel Ray.
Oh, you see, I couldn't
Was
remember
it
the name.
Rachel
Magazine.
Rachel
Really?
Ray
Rachel Ray got married to that poem.
had a recommitment ceremony.
Recommitment ceremony.
Recommitted, that's what it was,
And she
recommitted.
wrote this poem, it
Rachel
was
Ray.
covered
In People
Five Good
Magazine.
People magazine,
That's
and
cool.
many other places.
That's
And
right.
she said, well, her husband really liked whiskey. Which I loved. I thought that's really understands this poem. But then she also said, in People magazine, she explained, she gave a wonderful account of the poem, that she liked the wackiness and it seemed to be, have the bathos, but it was self-confident. She actually gave a very good account of the nature of the poem. So my 15 seconds in popular culture.
It will come back again. Right? So this is a song by the Fuzz. So I'm going to stop playing the song. But so these two songs, I had Morning, Morning and Kill for Peace. queued up. Kill for Peace, I don't know, it seems a time to be listening to this song again. Morning, Morning, and I turned to the Fugs because I was listening to a series of podcasts where Charles was being interviewed by various people, and this particular podcast is on Penn Sound, and it's a beautiful conversation about Thule Kupferberg. And the people in the conversation, you've got Leanne Brown, who told me to read this reading. You have Charles, you have Nada Gordon, the Flark founder, and this other guy, I should remember.
And
his
Pierre.
name. Oh, yes,
Pierre George,
Pierre was
very
there,
late in the law, we
yes.
just had the 1 year, his yard site, and then
Yes.
hosted by Al. So the idea to do something about Thule Kupferberg's poetry. Ed Sanders may be better known to some people with Fugs, but he wrote Morning, Morning, that's my views, a great poem of his.
Well, and it was an incredible conversation for a lot of reasons, but I was really struck by how you talked about morning, morning. And I actually think there's something of that morning and love in All the Whiskey Man, right? And that this morning, morning, you hear echoes not only of morning as the day, but morning as the green. And so I wonder about that in your work, which I think is in your work, those edges, and that even when there's a sense, at least my experience of your work and even my experience of your humor, my experience of our conversations over these years, I mean, I'm one of the people who forces you to be on the telephone.
Well, no, it's right, but
I
you
don't
do
know.
enjoy talking. We often have very long conversations.
Well, it's my message, it's the message from my life as a teenage girl. But I think about that space, I've described it as laughing to keep from dying, and other things, but.
Well, I mean, it's funny, I think as I mentioned Stokowski, but there's a wonderful, famous line of Stokowski's, see sun and think shadow, and, which this echoes. So it's the overlay. I mean, I actually came up in a discussion recently about what does Duchamp mean by non-retinal? Well, one, it means many things, and this isn't part of the primary thing, but one of the things is that you never see things as themselves, you see things with many different kinds of overlays, including the opposite. So that's what Kupferberg is playing with here. It's a poem about melancholy or depression, and yet it's so beautiful. So morning is sun, but also he doesn't death or sadness is present at the same time. It doesn't obliterate the other, it actually kind of illuminates it like an eclipse. So it's very beautiful. Blues, dark, very dark song, and yet it kind of, if you just hear it with the Fugs, it seems, very charming. In fact, after that show, I saw different people who knew that Thule Kupferberg, they never really thought, which is great, they never really kind of saw that dark side. But it's very explicit that it's about despair.
There's something, one, I think of the reference to, this is very weird, and it only occurred to me recently that the kinds of poetry I like reminds me of Kind of Blue, actually, in the title and in the reference, and that kind of shades of blue and shades of.
I actually wanted to call something kind of a poem or a book, but it was overdetermined because of Miles Davis, but I love that album. But sure, absolutely, Kinds of Blue, multiple shades of the same, or kinds of gray, or actually, you think add Reinhardt, kinds of black. It interests me very much. So kinds of white. I mean, that seems to be more my Trump way.
Kinds of, wow. That's a
Well,
really
because-
long question, because then I think, okay, do we go back to talking about well, I think Afro-pessimism, but
Mhm.
you were saying, was it Judeo?
Judeo-pessimism. Yeah, so I have a
Yes.
couple of poems which I'll go through here. Actually, one of them is in that same sequence of summa contra gentiles. I'm interested in Afro-pessimism, not to agree or not, but it is related to this. So Afro-pessimism, to some degree, is the idea that things don't get better. You know, I'm really interested in that kind of pessimism, that Bernstein sense, pessimism of the intellect. And against hope, that poem that I read is very much of that vein. But I always think the reverse. What would Judeo-pessimism? And the funny thing is, how could you not think? Judeo-pessimism is the given. That's not a movement or an idea. Judeo-pessimism is the basic, shtick, right? So, not for all Jews. I have to emphasize. I don't speak for all Jews for all time. In the Jewish ethnic world that I'm from, very specific, Judeo-pessimism would be the given. Not a particular point of view. So.
Well, I also think that it's not just that things
But
don't
they're
get
not the same,
better.
I'm just saying.
No, I get it, but that it suggests that there has to be some other kind of imaginary that's possible, rather than the sort of narrative of ascent or progress, that somehow there has to be a different frame of how we navigate that.
Actually, I couldn't say that. I mean, I wouldn't have read that. It's a problematic poem. I'm deeply suspicious and even hostile to this poem that I wrote. I just want to emphasize, I want to announce it first. It's very, very short, Judeo-pessimism. We're white, we said to the brown shirts.
Yeah.
It's
That
just
doesn't
about the
say
color.
very much.
It's just about color code.
If only it were only about color coding. So I also chose these poems because I was going to ask you a question about 1968.
Yeah.
Right? And how you decided to become a poet, but also how poetry sort of comes up in this moment when you're a student at Harvard. Are you there yet?
Well, my 18th birthday was April 4th, 1968. It was the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated. I was the editor of my school paper, Bernstein. So that would be 68. In Columbia, there was the Columbia student strike. It was a very powerful moment. And of course, here in Berkeley, we knew about the free speech movement and Mario Savio's wonderful speech about intervening into the machine. It's just, Mark Rudd at Columbia. So yeah, that was, and that's also when I met Susan B. Not here today, but I met her February 9th, 1968. And we were both in high school at that time. So 1968 has lots of resonance.
But you're also not yet a poet.
Well, I'm still not yet a poet. Maybe.
So it's always a becoming, huh?
No, in 1968, poetry wasn't something I knew a lot about. I mean, I knew, some poetry. I mean, I was a reader, but it wasn't the main frame of my thinking a little bit later. Yeah, and 68, of course, is so iconic. I use that myself. And I'm looking at the audience, and this audience has a lot of people for whom 68 would be significant. And actually, one of the things that really interests me is those of us born after the Second World War, so 1945 to early 50s, versus those born during the war, which I wrote about years ago, which is very specific, 1937 to 1945, because it has, to me, that there's a huge difference between those cultural experiences. And I feel I have a great debt to pay to that half generation older than me. And I think a lot of us of my age, because it's called, I had a piece which I always called a kind of crackpot work, but it was particularly fun. It's called The Second War on Postmodern Memory. It's in one of my early books, The Apoetics. I wasn't sure about it. I mentioned a whole lot of poets. Michael is the one here, but there are a lot of other poets who fit into that. And I thought, there's something different, one of which is that they didn't, most of those poets, and actually many of those poets said they really liked this essay and they identified with it, so that was interesting to me. Their work was, the radicalness and inventiveness of it was, for them, to some degree, idiosyncratic, and rather than connect them up to other people, it actually made them more solitary or in conflict, whereas the '68 generation, we saw that, we connected that, and also we connected it up to many things which maybe other people didn't, but certainly anti-Vietnam War, anti-racism. So it was a moment of solidarity in terms of the work, whereas I think just that group slightly before. I mean, Susan Howe is another, very close to me, and I often talk to her, born in 1937. She writes about this, so you can actually see it, and it's palpably different. So, so 68 means different things, but to some degree, 68 is given to me by that older generation. Those were the people who were, I was too young, I loved, being able to be on the sidelines, but I was, not able to generate that extremely, international change. But that older generation, slightly, were the people who paid a high price for it, often, as we know. And to me, it was a fundamental shift within American poetry, reflecting, of course, the Second World War. And that's what it's about. And the extermination of the European Jews and the atomic bomb seen together as this kind of, as a catastrophe that we're still, of course, living in. But I think now I realize that is a particular cultural moment, as everything is, and that my generation's relationship to that is something that wouldn't be the case for younger people. It's a very specific thing at a specific time. It should not be universalized. And I think the universalizing creates a lot of misunderstanding in relationship. Especially it has to do with the 50s and the revolt against the 50s so much. But it's, being so close to that particular set of historical things, and then looking around for poetry that spoke to that. So
I'm thinking about Harvard, right? Thinking about, yes, Harvard as this kind of locus of a great deal of American poetry, right?
I'm not
so,
aware of that.
well, but you're an alumni.
Yeah, and indeed, a lot, yes, of course, a lot of terrific poets.
And what is it? I know you don't believe in biography, but
I
what
believe
is it? Well, you're not interested in. I know, but I'm curious about what how the experience at Harvard makes space for the poet you become.
Well, that's
you're
it, yeah.
also
I mean, there's
an
a lot of,
organizer where you're also, and it's not about fitting into anything.
Well, I do write about that in the kind, as you know, so it's like a kind of a lead into, in the same section, which is like 15 fits, I think I call it, called Summa Contra Gentiles, of which I read 2 parts, but one of the longer parts is called First Gen. And it makes the point that I wish I had known what First Gen was, because it would have helped me to understand what was going on. So it took me like 40 years before I understood what was going on in a place like that, going from the world that I was in, to that place, which I didn't like. But also we had the anti-war movement. But also, I love the books and I love many of the professors who I became very close to, but I didn't really like most of my fellow students. And that's it's me too. I mean, it's my rejection of them, right as it was. That's the problem. But
say it into the camera.
it's when I go into and explain that. But it was just, I think it's something that a lot of people share who go into those institutions who's, and I didn't even understand it at the time. It's not as if I didn't know what it was, but the experience there was unlike anything else, and also nobody in my family knew anything about it at all. I had no, not even the vaguest conception of what it was, so it was all, I was on my own, as many people are. And yet at the same time, it was 1968, so I was arrested at University Hall, when I was 19 years old. I must have just turned 19. And I discovered only recently a letter my father wrote, which really surprised me, in which he wrote, don't expel him, he's really a good person, and he was a pacifist, which I wouldn't have thought my father would write. He certainly not happy that I did that. But,
not happy that you got arrested, not happy that you were protesting.
yeah, both those things, yeah. But anyway, he still wrote that letter, which I think, one of the things about that letter which I like very much is that if he had known the people who were going to read that letter, he was wasting his breath. But I wasn't expelled, I was put under warning. But I talk about that in there, and actually, by the way, because since we mentioned this, because that's not just 1968, and I have strangely very similar politics and even aesthetic views now. I was against the occupation of University Hall. I hope that, you might be disappointed. I didn't like the people who were doing that. I was totally against any kind of violent disruption. I was for peaceful protest, but disrupting people going to work. And it was, I think it was terrible, awful, a lot of that stuff. And I also thought a lot of the people leading that were, had very problematic, axiomatic politics, and they were often at Harvard, and this is, it's a gross oversimplification, but it struck me that they were from extremely privileged backgrounds, some of the leaders, and they were very hostile to their own families, and that instead of making things better, made things worse. I wasn't hostile to my family in that respect, but some of these people were, and there's a lot of famous things that come out of that, both here and. But I did love the Mario Savio speech. That to me is always played out in class. The sense of despair at the machine being grimed. It's a free speech movement to Berkeley. So, but it's only really reflecting on it many, many years later. Certain things came to be. But the great thing I think that it did for me as not for writing poetry, because I had nothing to do with, even though I edited the Freshman Literary Magazine and I did other things in theater, it had nothing to do with the literary poetry scene. In fact, I remember, I could mention his name, Lincoln Kaplan, this is kind of a great name, who was an editor of The Advocate, which is the magazine, and he went on to do other kinds of things. I submitted one poem to The Advocate, and he said to me, but I still remember it, so. From the same time I was listening to Truly Kupferberg, by the way, No Deposit, No Return. He said, you would have to be an accepted formalist poet for us to publish a poem like this. This is somebody who says one 19-year-old to another. Possibly me. I would have to be Louis Zukowski, who certainly would. But it was the mind. So I actually had nothing to do with that world, and I didn't intersect with it and so on. But one thing I did learn, which I think some people who don't go to places like Harvard, is the most important thing about going there, is I'm trying to think of the right word. I'm trying to think of symptoms for the word contempt, but don't use the word contempt. For the intellectual, ethical, political, and aesthetic views of people who go to Harvard. And a lot of people are very mystified by that. When you're there, my fellow students could not compare to my fellow students at the Bronx High School of Science. I'm not saying all of them, because there were 1,200 people, 1,600 if the other quote from that time was Nathan Pusey, the president, and this is verbatim, 400 women at Radcliffe, 1,200 men, that we cannot change the proportion or lower the number of men who are admitted to Harvard because Harvard has to trade the future leaders of America. That's an almost verbatim quote, 1968. You have to imagine, it wasn't like we didn't understand it. I mean, it was as outrageous, well, maybe not more, but as outrageous that he said that then as now. I mean, it's 1968, it's not 1568. This was the mindset, and so maybe I overreacted, probably I did, to not really accept what I later came to call official verse culture as being something that we need to respect. You have to earn our respect in and of itself as an authority.
But you're also studying it. I mean, this is the thing that's interesting for me, right? That somehow the resistance to a certain kind of indoctrination, you're like, often I'll say in class, okay, you really have to, maybe you hate something, but read it closely and understand why you hate it.
No, I've spent my life, I think this comes up when people talk about, even with poetry, you know, the idea that you wouldn't read something or because the views of the poet writing it were abhorrent or bad or weren't shared. I mean, my world would be non-existent. I can't even imagine what that would be. But as I was saying, I think that's also a very, that's a very New York ethnic attitude, because it's also just survival. It's unimaginable coming from where I come from. And I wouldn't even want to go there. And also, I don't think, I've learned an enormous amount from, I mean, a pound is because I've written a lot about it, but about Pound, who I think, I love the work of Pound. Once I wrote about pounding fascism, and I said everything negative that I could say, I even liked it more, because I got it out of my system, but, well, not out of my system, but in the system. But one of the things that's really important for me about that, and the modernists, not just him, is, and he's a contradictory person, and we're talking about later in his life, not early in his life, and so on, but people tend to demonize fascism, which of course I'm all in favor of, but it's always a parody, or it's like crazy. I don't think that's true now, by the way. I think now we get it. But rather than people like us and smart people and great artists, the idea that a great artist who is really great wouldn't be a fascist is something, that I have spent a long time coming to terms with. It doesn't that you, obliterate it at all. And why is fascism appealing to people? Of course, as many people have written, it has to do with some of its aesthetic value. So you can't, I'm really interested in creating. This is maybe it's something I wouldn't normally say, but just between us, at least, there's a lot of cameras.
And anybody who's watching.
I'm really interested in creating poems that are anti-fascist and anti-authoritarian, as most of the people in my generation that I care about are, not more so, but equally so. And but that doesn't. But you can. It's just impossible in the structure of Western culture, which I am completely a part of, and love from the Greeks to the present, or even the Hebrew Bible to the present. That's a part of that it's there. You can't just say, well, that's bad, I'm going to cut it out. And it isn't ugly. It's very appealing. I mean, I have the great advantage of a lot of that negative stuff would be focused on me, and you, by the way. So I always think that that's a great, the people who don't feel directly confronted by it really are at a loss. They don't have the privilege that we have to kid ourselves. To kid ourselves. I can't kid myself about Ezra Pound and what he said in his radio speeches. So I live with that, and that to me is an advantage.
Well, it's seeing the shadows, or seeing the abyss so you don't fall in. I mean, that's how I feel about it. I feel like I cannot not see the abyss, otherwise I'm taken out.
I mean, I read the poem the other night here, something very, because I was so astounded. It's just a Bay Area reference, and I was told I need to have 20% of my references Bay Area. I just saw it one day with Larry Agnew, which is one of my favorite poets. And, that foreigner is Larry Agnew if you put a space in. So the poem is called Foreigner for Eigner. And that's one of the kind of amazing things about names sometimes. But the last line of that poem is, agility, said the Jew, the ability to agitate.
Wow. So I looked at the time, we're actually close to time, which is
Uh-huh.
very weird.
I'm just
Wanna-
getting started.
I know. That's because all
We're
that
still in
coffee you
1968.
had.
I'm only 18 years
I was gonna
old.
put you first, but it's all the caffeine you had. I don't drink caffeine like that. I would like to
But my
open
mug
it to
is making a
questions
difference
you
is
have.
what I do.
Right, isn't that lovely? Any questions? Do you have questions for, I mean, it's really beautiful.
Or
to
answers,
see.
because I would appreciate some answers.
Yeah, answers. Do you have questions or answers, or, I don't know, riddles?
Lenny, my great friend, a long time comrade.
Student from 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I loved your performance of the liner notes. I don't remember the title.
A poet supreme, so named
Poet
after
Supreme,
John
yeah.
Coltrane's, because Cecil Taylor, less known, is a fantastic poet and writer and performer, but the poems themselves, written in multiple colors, haven't been published because of, sadly, estate problems. But anyway.
Well, I love the performance, and it was so skillful, and yet, and at the same time, because they're not opposed, it had a lot of stutter.
Well, it's all, that's right, of course.
So I wondered, and stutter's a topic that we
Right.
share, and I wondered if you just talk
Yeah.
more about that.
This is like a ringer's question, by the way. Yeah, so I'm really, of course, interested in stuttering and what that means. And, I'm interested in scat and also the outside sounds of Cecil Taylor, and thinking how you could map those on to one another. So, of course, my shtick with the German and the French and all of the kind of not so hidden, language that are in there, their aesthetic cues is very different than Cecil Taylor. But I'm interested in the in stuttering as a space of thought, and also linguistic repetition to create rhythms, especially repetition of consonants or consonant phonemes, and how that creates a kind of there's one of my favorite Ashray poems, since I wrote a poem about Ashray, it's called The Skaters, and I wrote about that, but it's that kind of sliding that I'm interested in creating on the surface of the poem, that something is just, it's hovering on top and moving, but it almost stops time, and yet it's entirely rhythmic. So, well, stuttering and various kinds of cognitive dyspraxia, pervade my work, and I have no idea why.
When Norman and I were driving in, we were talking about you and Gertrude Stein, and we wondered, how did you run across or when Gertrude Stein?
So this is, once again, we're back to 1968, which is perfectly okay with me. I wrote my senior college paper, they call it a thesis, or dissertation, in 1971, on Gertrude Stein and Ludwig Wittgenstein.
There it is.
And that's available online. I put up a version of it because we did a book separately. So I read Stein maybe for the first time in 1968 or 69. And I just thought it was incredible work. Nobody where I went to college had ever had any interest in her.
How did you find out about that?
Yeah, actually, I do know. There isn't actually an answer to that. I was thinking, I don't know, but I do know. Susan B., who I've already met, I don't know why we're still in the 68, 69, but she went to...
That was the place.
She went to Barnard College.
Susan's
and
art.
I went, so Susan's done a lot of covers for me and collaborations. She went to Barnard College, you know, we met in high school, but I went to up north. She took a class with Catherine Stimson, women poets, feminist class, early very important. I still am friends with Catherine Stimson. And Gertrude Stein was one of the people in the class. Now, I think maybe I already knew about it, but then I think I already knew about it. It even offends me. So, but I say it, I'm true to my conscience. I think I already knew about it. I didn't find out about it this way. But Susan is not so sure about that, but it's hard to know. But anyway, so but Susan said, because she knew my interest. I mean, the fact, I mean, I was interested in the visual arts and other things, and of course Joyce and things like you better. And she said, I think you'd be interested in this. And I was, particularly starting with the Native Americans. But then I spent really too much time, but felt compelled to writing about Stein. Not some of the essays, but some of the the stuff around the dossier that I edited, the stuff around that, the accusations, false. But the false accusations of Gertrude Stein, which are exactly like what the Republicans do, disinformation, are perpetrated even this year by the New York Times, the New York Review of Books, and the New Yorker. They're not put forward by the so-called right, and it always seems to me, I know I'm a voice crying in the wilderness, but I find that very troubling that they are unable, even though the facts are right there, not to repeat disinformation. There are plenty of bad things to say about somebody, so why make things up? Plenty of negative things you could say about Gertrude Stein, but not the ones that they're saying. So this is even the last review of the wonderful new biography that just came out, which has a very good account of this. The New York Times Review repeats things that are directly contradicted in the book about her activities during the Second World War, and it ends with the idea that she's a coward. It actually says that she's a coward, as if this person, whoever it is, could have lived through the experience that Gertrude Stein lived through. I mean, the condescension of it is amazing. He actually says at the end, even though Francesca Wade's book is excellent, got many great reviews, Francesca Wade's doesn't spend too much time on it, but she has it exactly right. And he contradicts that, this reviewer, and says, you know, if you really look at what she did, how can we take this writer seriously? She was a coward. And I think, you know, it's unbelievable. This is 2025. So, you know, I'd rather not be spending my time talking about this now either, but it's something that I thought was important to counter. So, and that's partly because I thought, but the work also, as other reviews, like even the TLS, which was very funny. The TLS review of this book came out a year early, and had a cover of Gertrude Stein. It was like her image, because she's like, she's one of the most famous and ubiquitous and influential figures of her period. And her picture's on the cover of it. And I like the TLS. I mean, this is a substantial publication. And the thing said, you know, it's so interesting. It's a biography of somebody that nobody reads and who's unreadable. The story is interesting.
Well,
I
you
mean,
should know
this
that
is the
our
cover article.
Walked in and said, we have to talk about Stein. Well, she's not here now, but Ava, who was the timekeeper in class, is a big fan of Gertrude Stein.
You know, there are lots of reasons why Stein gets that reaction, and we'll understand, and they're all true. The reasons you can imagine who she was, right, in terms of ways she was looked at, in terms of her identity, the triple negative identity that she had. But I always like to emphasize that, because it's also in the Times Review. You know, it's not like you don't assign somebody to write about Picasso who finds Picasso's work worthless. This is not something that you do. But these publications assign people who think that those of us who like the writing are frauds, that the writing has no value. And that's who they have reviewing it. And I mean, of course, it's a great tribute to her. in a sense, that she remains difficult. She's actually not so difficult, and there are a lot of things you might not like about her, but it's not, how can you be making such a fuss about something
Well,
that's...
but what is difficult? I mean, I don't know, COINTELPRO wasn't that long ago, and I think about the need to have us think in standardized ways.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Think
Right,
about
right.
what is outlawed, what is removed,
Yeah.
what we cannot say
Yeah.
in certain spaces. I mean, I won't tell the story of somebody I'm pointing to, but there's a word that, you know, one cannot say in certain spaces without suffering certain kinds of repercussions. And so the reality of why the Times, which, you know, names itself the paper of record, at the same time that, well, whose record are they keeping?
Yeah, well,
Right?
yeah, and I mentioned 3 publications I work, so I think it's important. The Times is actually not the most significant because, although I've read the Times every
And you were
day
in
in
the
print
Times.
since I was 14 years old, but the Times, it's fair to say, has no role to play in American literary culture. It doesn't even pretend to be, so it's just interested in this biography, a human interest story. There are other of these publications, that's not true. But I know what I was going to say is there are these 3 obvious aspects of who she was: Jewish, lesbian, and of course it repeats to say woman, but there's slightly different valences. And she really becomes famous by creating as Wanda Corn. Actually, here in the Wanda Corn show here at the San Francisco Jewish Museum.
Yeah, it was the Jewish Museum.
Yeah. That was a revelation to me, and I realized I was completely wrong. I always thought the celebrity stuff was not, and then I realized, I mean, she says, and she's absolutely right, that one of Gertrude Stein's many geniuses was to create these images of herself that affected around her. So rather than think of that as not being a part of her work, in a way it's one of her most successful parts. But I think, and it's not true, but I think, of course, but you're saying that too. I think the reason that she remains a persistent subject of this kind of condescending dismissal is because of her writing. And her writing is still not able to be assimilated, but however, writers are like, strangely, equally as well. I mean, different friends of mine have pointed out, and it is true, and I hate to say this, that my work is much more like Ezra Pound than it is like Gertrude Stein. But
at least you admit he was a fascist.
yeah, well, I mean, but nonetheless, I'm just saying from a technical point of view, of a collage and kind of multiplicity, it just, I would have denied this for a while, but it's, you know, my work is really not a whole lot like Gertrude Stein. But of course, you know, Eliot, Pound, you know, are Joyce. I mean, they're writers I like equally much, but they're entirely canonical, so it's weird. So there's something about her work, formally, that somehow is not able to be assimilated into the high culture. It isn't just who they are, because they're all great writers, despite whatever their views are. They're all great writers. And Stein herself has many political problems. I'm not
This is
suggesting.
what I think my mom's critique was of the other writers, and I think it was related to an idea of play and experimentation that was somehow separate from, and this is, and I know we'll disagree on this. Like
It's good.
yeah, but it was all about style, right? It was like, oh, this is the fashionable mode to operate in, and that it was irrelevant.
Yeah.
I mean, utterly irrelevant. And so there's some way that for Stein, like even if, you know, we go over the completed portrait of Picasso, there is no way that if I told him, there's no way that one can read that and not read the style is actually essential to making meaning, right? And the structures of the sentences make us understand Picasso in particular ways. I think with Eliot, there's a way that people mimic Eliot's writing without the kind of pressure of, you know, nation destroyed by war, without whatever pressures make that mean in a particular way, art, you know, whatever. That's,
But I mean, you know, partly it's, you know, I was thinking, you're chosen. Gertrude was fortunate, unfortunate that she couldn't be those people. So her work isn't symbolizable for many reasons. So she went with, you know, but sometimes it's just, you know, when I read things, I say, you know, just, Stein is, as I say, very, very, very problematic. If you read patriarchal poetry, you could see that it's an anti-fascist work. More so, it's very explicit. And if you read the complete portrait of Picasso, she loves Picasso, but she's saying that he's a tyrant, that he's put on a pedestal. And then she has
to break the
but it's also just a kind of queer writing. It's explicit. It's not, of course, many people don't see it. You know, the question about stuttering. Shutters shut and shutters open, and so do queens. Or what is queens in that? And queens versus kings. So she's completely aware that shutters shut and shutters opening is a fantastic image of the blinds and toggling, but also being shut in and being open. And it's the stuttering. It's another example of kind of Jewish stuttering, you could say. Shutters open. And then, you know, I tell this story that at Stanford, John Felsteiner said to me, who I admire, he translated Salon and wrote a book about Salon. Although nothing like Pierre Droz' monumental translation, but he said, I was included in the Jewish Norton Anthology of Jewish Literature, which I was happy to be, and he said, I said, well, what are you going to include Stein? And he said, well, we're not sure we're going to include Stein. And I said, well, wouldn't that be like an anthology of Irish poetry that didn't include Joyce? And it just, it boggles the mind. Now people might not see how that's possible, but John Felsteiner was a thoughtful person, and somehow it didn't register. But how could it not register? The Making of Americans is like Fall Asleep. I mean, it's about the Jewish immigrant experience. It's just like, you don't advertise it that way. But actually, in a certain way, it is advertised. I mean, it is put forward that way. But of course, the same people say they can't read. Janet Malcolm, who wrote a whole, you know, Janet Malcolm was much more careful of what she said, so I'm not accusing her, but she totally dislikes Stein's work. And she can't read it, and she says nobody can read The Making of America. I said, well, then why are you writing this stuff? A lot of people like The Making of America. I'm not saying you have to, but it's actually a very appealing work. Every year we used to have marathon readings at the Paul Cooper Gallery. People, you know, spending 24 hours reading.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that you have to agree. You know, and then of course you think of Robert Duncan too. I mean, so many great, and Ashbery, in the generation older than me. It's just a complete dismissal of that anybody could actually like it. That's the attitude that's sort of, I mean, we know people don't like a whole range of modern art or abstraction. You know, that's the case, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. That's their view. But there's something more aggressive about it. She gets under people's skin in a way that's you know, fascinating, and you know, that is in a way her. She's much more. So that's what's so funny about the TLS thing. In my experience, she's one of the modernist writers that people like the most. That they perform, and a lot of those people are not so much even aware of this other kind of pushback again. They just accept.
But I actually think that's part of the resistance, and that it's that there's a way that her work opens up the possibilities of language for those that, for instance, I think of you, but I think of others who, whether it's the musicality, the recursiveness, all these things, that it forces you to attend to language, or not forces, it offers you the opportunity to attend to language in some other kind of way. And that seems like nonsense for some people.
Oh, you know, absolutely. But some people's nonsense doesn't bother people as much.
Yes. So, no last question. I think it's 7 o'clock. I was supposed to let you go earlier. Thank you so much. Well, it is, what is it, 2026? So, thank you so much. Really, thanks for coming, guys. Come back again. You know, come back again.
When I was a kid,
Good job. All right, good job. Good job.
You were.
Okay.